Something strange is happening in the national parks of North America, places where beauty and tranquility hide unexplained mysteries. For decades, thousands of people have vanished without a trace from some of the most seemingly safe areas. The victims weren't strangers to nature, but they seem to become prey to an invisible force that stalks and hunts humans in the heart of the wilderness. Is there something lurking in the shadows of these forests? Or are these disappearances just bizarre coincidences? Join us as we explore the most mysterious stories from North America's national parks and search for answers to these unexplainable vanishings. David Pillai Ders, an ex-police officer turned author, has uncovered a chilling mystery that has long been concealed in the shadow of North America's national parks. After painstakingly cataloging thousands of strange deaths and disappearances, he now raises a haunting question. Is something lurking in these woods, stalking and haunting those who wander too deep? North America's national parks are renowned for their breathtaking beauty, majestic mountains, tranquil lakes, endless grasslands, and dense forests that seem to stretch on forever. From the iconic Yosemite and Yellowstone in the United States to the serene Yoho and Jasper in Canada, these parks attract millions of visitors each year. With landscapes so awe-inspiring, it's easy to see why they draw nature lovers and adventurers from across the globe. Yet behind this natural splendor lies a disturbing reality. While many visitors explore these parks to their heart's content, a dark and perplexing phenomenon persists. People keep disappearing without a trace. For most, a simple hiking or hunting trip in these vast, untouched wildernesses ends without incident. However, some are never seen again. Despite the efforts of search and rescue teams, a shocking number of people vanish, often under baffling, inexplicable circumstances. What begins as a picturesque outdoor adventure can suddenly take a tragic, eerie turn. Some of these disappearances remain unsolved, their mysteries fading into the cold, silent air of the forests. But the most unsettling part of all, these incidents aren't just rare occurrences, they're disturbingly frequent. In the US, the phenomenon has been called the nation's silent mass disaster, as people mysteriously vanish from the parks by the thousands, often without a trace and sometimes without explanation. Despite the efforts to uncover the truth, the authorities seem unwilling, or perhaps even afraid, to confront what might really be happening in these seemingly peaceful landscapes. What's hiding out there in the wild? And more disturbingly, why does no one want to talk about it? The National Park Service has only recently begun compiling a database of missing persons in these vast and often isolated landscapes. A chilling fact uncovered by David Politis, a former police officer turned author. Politis, in his extensive investigation into these strange disappearances, has catalogued over 1,000 baffling cases in a series of books titled The Missing 411. Despite the thoroughness of his research, Politis admits that this is merely the tip of the iceberg, as he suspects many more cases remain hidden from the public eye, their stories lost in time. What's more unnerving is that many of these disappearances seem to share an eerie and unexplainable pattern. The idea for this investigation began after Politis visited a national park and was approached by a ranger involved in search and rescue efforts. The ranger, disquieted by the number of unexplained disappearances, confided in Politis that he believed something much larger and darker was at play. Politis, a seasoned outdoorsman himself, was struck by the idea of experienced hikers and hunters vanishing in terrain they knew intimately. This planted the seed for a research project that would soon grow into an obsession, drawing him into years of digging, questioning, and uncovering patterns that suggested something far beyond ordinary circumstances. Politis began by filtering out cases that involved clear signs of foul play, mental illness, suicide, animal attacks, or drowning, focusing only on disappearances that could not be easily explained. Over time, a disturbing trend began to emerge. These strange vanishing acts seemed to cluster around specific locations, particularly national parks and the Great Lakes region of North America. The more he uncovered, the more he became convinced that something profoundly mysterious was at work. He believes that behind these disappearances, there is something intelligent, patient, and predatory, something that remains hidden, out of sight, and terrifyingly elusive. One of the most well-known cases to highlight this unsettling phenomenon is that of 6-year-old Dennis Martin. On July 14, 1969, Dennis was hiking with his father, grandfather, and 9-year-old brother near an area known as Spence Field in the Great Smoky Mountains. At around 4 p.m., Dennis suddenly vanished without a trace, leaving behind no clues or signs of struggle. Despite an extensive search effort that spanned weeks, Dennis was never found, and his disappearance remains one of the most baffling and infamous cases in the history of national park mysteries. What makes cases like Dennis Martin's so disturbing is that the conventional explanations, whether they be animal attacks, environmental factors, or human error, have either been ruled out or seem incredibly unlikely. The question remains, what or who is responsible for these inexplicable vanishings? The more Politis and others investigate, the more it becomes clear that something far darker might be hiding in the forests, waiting for its next victim. Dennis, his brother, and a couple of other boys they had befriended decided to play a game of hide-and-seek while hiking. When the game ended, all the boys emerged from their hiding places except for Dennis. He was nowhere to be found. The last time anyone had seen him, he was running toward a bush on the edge of the field, just before the thick woods began. Dennis's father, William Martin, immediately became concerned and set off, running 2 miles up the Appalachian Trail in search of his son, but there was no sign of him. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 1,500 searchers, aided by helicopters and sniffer dogs, scoured 56 square miles of wilderness, yet Dennis was never found. Even a special team of Green Berets joined the search, but they worked in isolation, refusing to communicate with the other search teams, which many found strange. Normally, the Green Berets would only be deployed for matters involving national security. On the same day, Dennis disappeared. A family hiking up toward Rowan's Creek, about 4 kilometers away, heard an unsettling scream at 5:30 p.m., an hour and a half after Dennis had last been seen. When they looked in the direction of the scream, they reportedly saw what they described as a bear-like creature with the body of a man, carrying a small child over its shoulder, disappearing into the forest. The FBI dismissed this account, stating that the timeframes were too narrow for someone to cover that distance in such rough terrain. However, Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had been part of the search, proved this theory false by hiking the same distance in just over an hour. Another unsettling disappearance occurred in October 1976, when 16-year-old Trenny Gibson from Knoxville went on a field trip to the Great Smoky Mountains with 40 classmates. The group had been hiking to a spot called Andrews Bald, and as the day wore on, they broke into smaller groups based on walking speed. Trenny was about 20 meters ahead of the others when she suddenly stopped in the middle of the trail, seemingly looking at something in the bushes. She then stepped off the path and disappeared into the dense forest. Her friends later reported that they had seen her glance off the trail and walked toward the woods. Despite a massive search effort, Trenny was never found. Authorities initially questioned the point where she had allegedly left the path, citing the steep, nearly vertical drop and the impenetrable woodland beyond. Still, no trace of her was ever discovered. In July 2010, Eric Lewis, an experienced climber, was scaling Mount Rainier in Washington with two companions. They were all tethered together by a rope, spaced 20 to 30 meters apart. The lead climber, Don Storm Jr., stopped at 14,000 feet, waiting for the others to catch up. Trevor Lane, the second climber, soon joined him, but Eric was nowhere to be found. They reeled in the rope, only to discover Eric wasn't attached to the other end, despite having seen him behind them just moments before. Bad weather was rolling in, so they initially assumed Eric had detached himself to rest. However, as they descended, they found no trace of him. Search and rescue teams scoured the slopes, but Eric's tracks simply vanished. His backpack, climbing harness, and snow shovel were found at 13,600 feet, but Eric was never seen again. Stephanie Stewart, a 70-year-old wildfire spotter, worked for Jasper National Park in Alberta, Canada. On the night of August 26, 2006, she was at the remote Athabasca Lookout Tower, 25 miles northwest of Hinton, performing her vital duty of watching for signs of wildfires. The next morning, she failed to conduct her routine radio check-in. A fellow spotter was sent to the tower to investigate, but found it completely deserted. All that was missing was her blanket. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The stove had been lit, and a pot of water had been left on the stove, but it had long since boiled away. Her truck was still parked outside, and no tracks were found leading in or out of the area. Despite being in sound mental health and having a loving family, Stephanie vanished without a trace, and she was never seen again. This strange disappearance led the provincial government to reassess the operational procedures at lookout towers throughout the region. These are just a few of the bizarre and chilling disappearances that have occurred in national parks across North America. Cases like these continue to defy logical explanations and raise unsettling questions about the true nature of these vast, mysterious landscapes. What or who is behind these disappearances remains a haunting mystery. Charles McCulloch, a 19-year-old amateur photographer from Virginia, was embarking on an extended vacation in December 1974 when he decided to hitchhike west, capturing the stunning landscapes along the way. By January the following year, he found himself staying with a friend in Oregon and planned a brief trip to Crater Lake to photograph the area's winter beauty. 2 days later, he never returned. A massive search and rescue operation was launched, but despite exhaustive efforts, no clues were found. No tracks, no scent, no eyewitnesses, nothing. A year later, a couple of hikers stumbled upon a backpack 12 miles off the trailhead, which was later identified as belonging to McCulloch. Park rangers quickly initiated another search in the same area, and within hours, they discovered the bizarre remains of McCulloch's body, or rather, what was left of it. The scene was utterly perplexing. The only trace of him found was his jeans, unbuttoned, sitting on a log in the middle of nowhere, frozen in place, as though an invisible person had been sitting inside them. His socks were sticking out from the bottom of the jeans, and inside them, small foot bones were discovered. Just 12 feet away, the top of his skull was found. His shirt, coat, boots, and other belongings were all missing, and the rest of his body was never located. The most baffling detail, however, was how he even reached this location in the first place. On the day McCulloch vanished, 7.5 feet of fresh snow had fallen, making it impossible to traverse that area. especially without a snowmobile. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain one of the strangest in the history of North American national parks. A similarly strange case unfolded in Canada's Yukon Territory in 2004. Bart Schleyer, a 49-year-old outdoorsman who had a reputation as one of the best yet least known survivalists, went missing during a solo hunting trip. In September 2004, Schleyer arranged for a pilot to drop him off in a remote area 175 miles north of Whitehorse, where he planned to hunt moose alone. He brought with him 3 crates of supplies, including food, camping equipment, and hunting gear. The pilot was scheduled to return 3 weeks later to pick him up, but when he returned, there was no sign of Bart. His camp was intact, well-stocked and organized, but Schleyer was nowhere to be found. A thorough search by the RCMP eventually uncovered some of his teeth and bone fragments about 60 feet away from his camp. Oddly, a dry bag was found in the area, apparently disturbed as though Schleyer had been sitting on it, and his hunting bow was propped up against a tree. Examination of nearby bear and wolf scat ruled out the possibility that a large predator had attacked him. Friends and authorities alike dismissed the idea that he had fallen victim to a bear or wolf, as he was an experienced outdoorsman who would have been prepared. What struck investigators as strange was the fact that if Schleyer had been taken by a predator, why hadn't the camp's supplies been disturbed? There were no signs of a struggle or broken branches, and no other clues to suggest any kind of violent encounter. His disappearance remains one of the Yukon's most puzzling, unsolved mysteries. In 2002, a strange case unfolded in Harris County, Georgia, involving 20-year-old surveyor Christopher Tompkins. Working with a 4-man crew, Tompkins was near dense woodland when the team wrapped up for the day and began walking back to their vehicle. The group was spaced about 50 feet apart, with Tompkins bringing up the rear. Within seconds, he vanished. His colleagues retraced their steps to the point where he was last seen and found a number of strange items: 12 cents in coins scattered on the ground, one of Tompkins's work boots snagged on a barbed wire fence, and fibers from his work trousers. Despite an extensive search involving hundreds of people, Christopher Tompkins was never found. Several months later, his other boot was discovered near a swamp, 900 yards from the spot where he had disappeared. The fact that his pocket contents were found on the road suggests that something unusual and possibly violent had occurred, but no one could explain how or why he had vanished so suddenly, leaving behind these odd clues. These disappearances, each eerie in its own right, raise unsettling questions. Whether it's the strange absence of a body, bizarre remains left behind, or unexplainable circumstances surrounding the cases, they remain mysteries that continue to haunt the wilderness. What happened to Charles, Bart, and Christopher? And why are such eerie disappearances happening in some of the most remote and beautiful places on Earth? The answers remain elusive, and these cases add to the growing list of unsettling vanishings that defy rational explanation. Todd Guide, a 22-year-old from Casanova, Michigan, attended a keg party on the night of June 11, 2005. After feeling tired and not wanting to drive under the influence, he decided to walk home around 12:30 a.m. At 12:51 a.m., Todd made a call to a friend saying, "I'm in a field," before the call abruptly cut off. His friend tried to call back, but all that was heard was heavy breathing or wind before the line disconnected again. Todd then attempted to call back 2 more times, with the final attempt at 12:57 a.m. But after that, there was no further contact. The next day, Todd failed to show up for a family gathering, which was completely out of character for him. His parents, concerned after learning that no one had seen him after the party, reported him missing. A massive search effort followed, involving over 1,500 volunteers, helicopters equipped with infrared cameras, and teams scouring lakes and swamps in the area. Despite their best efforts, there was no sign of Todd. He had seemingly vanished without a trace. Then, on July 2nd, 3 weeks later, a couple walking along the shore of Oban Hall Lake spotted something unusual in the water. At first, it appeared to be a man standing upright, his head and shoulders bobbing on the surface. To everyone's shock, it turned out to be the body of Todd Guy. The location where his body was found baffled searchers, as it was completely out of the direction he had been heading and had been thoroughly searched multiple times in the weeks following his disappearance. The cause of death was listed as drowning, but there were no signs of water in his lungs and his blood alcohol level was relatively low. So, the question remains, what truly happened to Todd Guy? David Politis, the former police officer turned author, has catalogued many such strange disappearances in his work, Missing 411. Politis suggests that there may be something highly unusual behind these disappearances, though he is cautious in directly pinpointing any specific cause. He hints at several possibilities, but the tone of his books suggests that there is something more extraordinary at play, something beyond the realm of rational explanations. Critics have dismissed his theories, arguing that he omits key details that don't fit his narrative, and that every case can be explained through more conventional means. Skeptics argue that these cases could involve animal attacks, serial killers, people becoming disoriented and lost, or even suicides. Yet, Politis dismisses these theories, pointing out that animal attacks typically leave signs like blood, torn clothing, tracks, or disturbances in the ground, none of which have been present in the cases he's studied. Similarly, he rules out serial killers, arguing that such criminals would likely leave traces of their presence, which are conspicuously absent in these cases. Becoming lost or disoriented might explain some disappearances, but many of the individuals who vanished were highly familiar with their surroundings, having hiked or hunted in those areas many times before. Even more perplexing is the fact that search and rescue efforts, often involving trained dogs, helicopters, and infrared technology, have failed to locate any trace of the missing person. This raises questions about the effectiveness of these searches when experienced searchers with the best technology at their disposal still cannot find any sign of the missing. Suicide, while always a possibility, also seems unlikely in many of these cases. The individuals who disappeared were in sound mental health, as far as anyone knew, making it improbable that they would have taken their own lives without leaving any evidence behind. Disappearing intentionally to start a new life is another possibility, but such an undertaking would require extensive planning and considerable financial resources. Moreover, it would be nearly impossible to hide such a move from family and friends. One more theory that Politis considers is the possibility of drug manufacturers operating in remote areas, though this is not a common explanation. While it may seem far-fetched, there have been instances, such as those portrayed in the TV series Narcos, where drug operations were concealed in isolated regions. Still, Politis is careful not to jump to conclusions, as many of these disappearances lack clear evidence pointing to any one culprit. The question remains, what is behind these strange and baffling disappearances in North America's national parks? Whatever the explanation may be, the stories continue to intrigue and mystify, with no satisfactory answers in sight. However, the national parks of North America seem like an unlikely place for criminal activity, given the sheer number of annual visitors. Drug dealers, for instance, would understand that killing someone in such a public place would only attract unwanted attention, especially from the National Park Service, search and rescue teams, and local law enforcement. Politis even suggests that some of these disappearances might be due to underlying illnesses or injuries sustained during a hike. Many of the missing individuals had some form of disability or reported feeling unwell before vanishing. Yet it remains perplexing that search and rescue teams, with all their resources, failed to locate the bodies. One might think that someone unwell would not stray too far from established trails. And if the cause was an accident, why would rescuers, equipped with dogs and infrared helicopters, still struggle to find them? When all the usual explanations are exhausted, Politis is left with few answers, only further mysteries. One bizarre commonality between many cases is the fact that when bodies are found, they often lack shoes or boots, or the victim may be partially undressed. What's more, a clear cause of death is rarely established. With all the possible explanations considered, some have ventured into more unconventional theories, paranormal or even supernatural. Speculation has ranged from the idea of woodland spirits to cryptids like Bigfoot, or even extraterrestrial involvement with alien abductions. Others suggest that people might have slipped through interdimensional portals, or that certain plants in the area might activate a defensive mechanism when humans approach. As far-fetched as these theories sound, there are reports from hikers who claim to have had such experiences and lived to tell the tale. One strange phenomenon, which many people have experienced while hiking, is called the silence. In these instances, all sounds in the forest suddenly vanish. Wildlife falls silent, the breeze dies down, and the air becomes unnervingly still. This eerie experience often makes people feel like they are being watched or stalked by something unseen. One such account comes from Jan Maccabee, wife of renowned optical physicist Bruce Maccabee, who was bow hunting in Ohio in 2010. At around 6:30 p.m., while perched 15 feet off the ground in a tree hide, Jan reported an unusual silence that overtook the woods. Moments later, she saw a strange distortion moving through the branches, about 20 feet away. The figure appeared humanoid, almost cloaked, and she snapped a picture before it disappeared. The wildlife sounds then returned. The photo shows what could be the edge of her face, with hair sticking out, backlit by the setting sun. A compelling piece of footage indeed. Similarly, in 2016, a video uploaded by YouTuber Scott Carpenter seemed to show what resembled a Bigfoot peeking out from behind a tree, perfectly camouflaged by its surroundings. While some skeptics may dismiss it as pareidolia, it remains an intriguing anomaly